We now shift our attention to a disturbing tactic surfacing across borders, one that targets women who reportedly dare to challenge Beijing. According to a report in The Times, activists in Britain are accusing China of weaponizing deepfake pornography and sexual harassment to intimidate female voices in the democracy movement. Women who specifically speak out against the Chinese Communist Party are being accused of being sex workers, and they're being targeted with misogynistic abuse. According to the report, Carmen Lau, a former Hong Kong district councillor who fled to the UK, recently discovered that her old neighbours in Maidenhead, a town which is located about 50 kilometres from London, received letters containing digitally manipulated sexual images of her. The envelopes were allegedly posted from Macau. They showed her face pasted onto nude or semi-nude bodies. In fact, with one image also depicting a fabricated sexual act. Each letter even listed her full former address. Lau was quoted in the report stating that these attacks were aiming to harm her credibility and scare her out of public life. With the bigger objective of silencing women who criticize authoritarian regimes, she's far from alone. At least 3 other pro-democracy activists have reportedly faced similar deepfake attacks. Canadian-based dissident YouTuber Yao Zhang had fabricated pornographic images circulated under spoofed accounts, mimicking official Canadian government pages, including those impersonating former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. 20-year-old activist Klo Cheung, who has a £100,000 bounty on her head from Beijing for allegedly taking part in an anti-government protest in Hong Kong when she was just 14 years old, described her sexualized abuse online. She received messages calling her a sex worker and claiming that her activism is linked to relationships with white men. She says the harassment follows a systemic pattern. Chung Ching Kwong, another activist, reports similar hostility. After relocating to the UK, she faced accusations of being a race traitor, and she endured degrading sexual remarks. She also added that Beijing and its supporters consistently use misogyny as a weapon to discredit women. Activists reportedly urged the British government to protect them from this transnational repression. Earlier this year, UK's Home Office reportedly rejected proposals for a dedicated hotline to support those harassed by foreign states, leaving activists without a clear channel to report intimidation. All right, moving on, nearly 72 hours. That is how long it took for Venezuela's most recognized opposition figure, Maria Corina Machado, to pull off one of the most dramatic escapes in modern political history. A journey that began in secret on a rain-soaked Caribbean shoreline and ended in Oslo, where she arrived just moments too late to accept her Nobel Peace Prize in person. Details of her journey have now been outlined in a report by the Wall Street Journal. An odyssey that reportedly looked almost impossible from the start. Visualize this: a tiny fishing boat rocking violently in the Gulf of Venezuela. Its GPS lost to the sea, its backup system dead, and its crew drifting helplessly in pitch-black waters. Even as 10-feet waves hammer the boat. For more than 3 hours, Machado reportedly sat in that darkness, knowing that if her rescuers could not find her, no one else would. Then through the wind, through the rain, a voice shouted her name. A larger vessel crept toward the boat. When the Nobel Prize winner stood up, waving her arms, wrapped in a heavy jacket and a black cap, confirming it was her. On that larger boat stood Brian Stern, a U.S. combat veteran leading the rescue. When he pulled her aboard, he radioed his team with the 3 words his crew were likely desperate to hear: jackpot, jackpot, jackpot. Stern put it simply, as he was quoted saying in the Wall Street Journal report, Stern's Grey Bull, a U.S. veteran-led private organization, managed Machado's rescue. Her escape had begun days earlier when she slipped out of hiding in disguise and quietly traveled from a suburb of Caracas to a coastal village from there. She boarded the old fishing boat chosen specifically to blend in. A mechanical failure caused a 12-hour delay. And by the time they finally left, daylight was gone. Storms built offshore. What the rough seas took away in safety, they gave back in stealth. The weather reportedly masked the boat from maritime radar, but it also pushed them far off the planned meeting point, approximately 40 kilometers off. Fearing an encounter with Venezuelan security forces or even the U.S. anti-smuggling patrols, when communication finally flickered back to life near midnight, the rescue boat surged ahead and rescued her. From there, the path cleared. Machado was ferried to the island country of Curacao. A private jet flew her onward to Oslo. Her daughter accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in her place. But when Machado finally arrived, she reportedly called the rescue what it truly was: a miracle.
Si puedo decirles que fueron horas.
Yes, I can tell you they were very intense hours, with moments when I felt there was a real risk to my life. And it was also a very spiritual time, because in the end, I simply felt I was in God's hands and that whatever the Lord decides will be.
Muy espiritual porque
Does Donald Trump want to destroy the European Union? Well, it certainly sounds like it. A new report making the rounds on social media, first published by an outlet called Defense One, claims that a longer, unreleased version of the U.S. national security strategy lays out a radical shift in Washington's approach to Europe. The unpublished strategy circulated before the White House released its official version last week. Details three core priorities for America: competition with China, a withdrawal from Europe's security, and a new focus on the Western Hemisphere. But it goes much further than that. The report states that the Trump administration wants to, quote, make Europe great again. And how does he plan to do so? Well, by pulling certain like-minded, presumably right-wing governments of Europe away from the European Union. Specifically, Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland are named. The strategy argues that Europe faces civilizational erasure due to immigration and supposed restrictions on free speech. It proposes that the United States support parties, movements, and cultural figures in Europe who promote traditional European ways of life just as long as they remain pro-American. Perhaps the biggest takeaway from the American security strategy was this. The publicly released NSS document criticizes a perpetually expanding NATO. The longer version, however, goes much deeper, calling on European NATO members to wean themselves off the US military support. Already, remember, some of the government of these states, like Hungary, for example, are widely known for their anti-EU stance and rhetoric. In fact, just today, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán accused officials in the European Union of systematically raping the law by planning to strip member states of veto powers over frozen Russian assets. The European Commission is due to vote on Friday on a plan to invoke Article 122 of the EU treaties, an emergency clause that allows decisions to pass by qualified majority instead of requiring unanimous approval. Now, this measure would let the bloc immobilize frozen Russian sovereign assets indefinitely and use the profits or interest to support Ukraine, even if some member states object to it. Taking to social media platform X, Viktor Orbán wrote, and I quote him, "With today's procedure, the Brazilians are abolishing the requirement of unanimity with a single stroke of the pen, which is clearly unlawful. The rule of law in the European Union comes to an end, and Europe's leaders are placing themselves above the rules instead of safeguarding compliance with the EU treaties. The European Commission is systematically raping European law." Not just on the topic of Russian assets, the Hungarian Prime Minister has, remember, often clashed with Brussels over the migration policy, rule of law, LGBTQ rights, and support for Ukraine, positioning himself as a defender of the Christian Europe against perceived Brussels overreach, liberalism, and Western influence. In fact, he's even used vetoes to block EU decisions and accused the bloc of trying to undermine his government. He has called the European Union a war project rather than a peace project, and is known for promoting a vision for a reformed EU led by what he calls patriots, focused on national interests. But largely, Europe's security strategy is currently fragmented, with the policies of the Trump administration accelerating a divergence in transatlantic threat perceptions. The Trump administration's Europe policy, remember, has only further highlighted the internal divisions within the bloc. And now, after the story about the longer leaked strategy document was published by Defense One, the White House has denied the existence of any version of the national security strategy other than the one published publicly last week and which was signed by President Trump. Now, WION cannot independently verify the authenticity of the Defense One report. Until this document is verified, these claims remain just that, claims. But what is clear, however, is that the official national security strategy signals a shift in America's global priorities. How far that shift goes is still uncertain.